Hi, reading group. I hope your first week of classes went well. It was really wonderful to get to discuss with some of you on Wednesday and get to know you a little bit better. I'm looking forward to looking at the discussion for those of you who are participating this week in that way, and hopefully have a chance to connect with you at some point during the weekly discussions. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about how the work and reading you did for last week will help support the work and the reading that you're going to be doing for this week. So for starters, you guys read about 21st century literacy skills, especially in the Burke chapter of the Beers text, where he talked about how the skills of students are changing and what skills are most important for students to be literate in today's world. Thinking about kind of a move from traditional literacy skills, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, which are still important. But then now, what does that look like in the 21st century? So for example, what does that mean in this digital world? And so hopefully that's something you've started to think about and will continue to think about throughout the class. Most of you also read about text complexity and the fact that we look at quantitative factors of text complexity, but then there's also qualitative factors of text complexity. So in terms of quantitative factors, those are factors that are often even machine generated. In fact, if you go to like Lexile.com, you can type in a textbook or several different books and figure out what is the Lexile level. But that's things like, what about the content makes it complex? What about the sentence structure makes it complex? What about the vocabulary makes it complex? To let us know if our students should be able to read and comprehend the text that we are providing them with. So we know students' Lexile level or whatever reading system that your school uses. This is something you can ask for if you aren't given. And we know that texts have a Lexile level. Most of the textbooks you use in your classroom will fit within the Lexile level, that range of like the 25% to 75%. So you're going to have students who are going to read at a higher Lexile level, and then you're going to have 25% of students who are going to read at a lower Lexile level, give or take, depending on your students. And we're going to get into differentiation more next week, and what does that look like for those students who struggle to read, and how we can support them. But we know that these quantitative factors are these are numbers that we generally assign to say students in general should be able to read at this specific level. So that is a little bit more prescribed and in some ways a little bit simpler. Now, on the other hand of that, and what you guys are going to be practicing with or have already practiced with as you finished up the assignment for Sunday, is considering the qualitative factors. And this is a little bit trickier because we are thinking about things like the experiences that students bring to a text. And so the assignment that you're doing for this week, it's a set of text considerations that you are going to read from a sample text and then be answering questions about what qualitative factors might make the text complex. And so for this coming week then, what you're going to be doing is thinking back to what made your text complex, and then now thinking about what you can do as a teacher to help students comprehend your text in general, but then also being mindful of the considerations that you talked about in terms of what might make the text especially complex. For example, for those of you who are English education, one of the sample texts that I posted was Malala text. Well, if students don't know anything about the Middle East or about the lack of education for girls, especially, then they might not be able to read that text. So Lexile level wise, they could read the text, but it's because of their lack of knowledge or experience about cultural factors that would make that text complex for them, which then would influence how I'm going to teach the text to my students. So let's look a little bit more at comprehension. So you see that I have us on our course page for comprehension, and you will see that you are going to be reading out of the Beers and the Hinchman text. And these texts are going to ask you to answer bigger theoretical questions about comprehension. So especially the Beers, which I would start with the Beers text because it does a really good job of asking you to kind of think critically about how do you know if students understand? How do you know if students are comprehending the text that you're asking them to read? And so they spend quite a bit of time talking about, how do we know students are actually comprehending and thinking? In addition to that text, and then also in the Hinchman text, it will give you all kinds of strategies to help students comprehend. So you're going to learn about all different kinds of strategies, and then you are going to be deciding which strategy or strategies are going to be best given the text that you analyzed for this last week. And so a couple of examples, you may have the students doing a close reading of a text. If you aren't sure what that is, you're going to get to it in the reading. You may be having students annotate the text. You may be doing some pre-teaching of the text, especially if you notice that there are especially challenging vocabulary words. And so there are tons of strategies you're going to learn about in the text. And I would encourage you to kind of make some notes about that as you're reading, whether you like to annotate yourself right within the textbook, or if you're going to take some notes that then you can go back to. But the goal is that you are going to kind of build a list of excellent strategies that you can use to make sure that your students are comprehending your text. The question you're going to be asking yourself as you're doing the assignment for this week is thinking about how do you know that students have comprehended the text that you are asking them to read. And so I've also posted for you so you can read about the strategies, but then I know for me it helps to see, well, what does this look like in a real classroom with real students? And so I have posted a sample video that shows an example of a close reading. There's another video through the teacher channel that is on a teacher who's using thinking notes, which is something that you may want to use. So these are just 2 examples of several examples for how you can use comprehension strategies to help your students comprehend the text. And so what you're going to be doing for this week, we have our weekly discussion for those of you who want to join Wednesday morning. Otherwise, you can participate virtually. You post initially on Thursday and then respond on Sunday, just like you did for this week. And then you are going to be completing an assignment where you're creating a lesson. No, you're not using the ONU lesson plan, but you are going to be using what I consider a BDA framework. So what are you going to do before you're going to ask students to read the text? What are you going to do while you're having students read the text? And then what are you going to do after you read the text so that you know that students actually have comprehended the text? And so what I've done within here too is I've listed several of the strategies that you guys are going to be reading about. So if you look at something and you think, I'm not sure what a think aloud is, that's a strategy that you're going to be looking at. So while they're reading the book, you may have them use close reading, repeated reading, questioning, visualizing, and so on and so forth. And then after reading the same thing, your book talks about using self-questioning strategies, text-dependent questions, and so on and so forth. So overall, you're answering this question of, my students are reading this text, what am I going to do to prepare them? How am I going to walk them through that text, being mindful of what you said made the text complex when we thought about the qualitative factors? And then what are you going to do after to assess their level of comprehension of the text? That's all I have for now. As always, feel free to email me, set up a conference, and then maybe I'll see some of you again this Wednesday in the discussion. Thanks.